Welcome back to another episode of Viking Bills, where we do a lot with a little. In the previous episode, we picked up this 2014 Dodge Charger in southern New Jersey, brought it back to New York after a quick test drive, making sure it ran and drove good, started stripping it apart, took the doors off, the fenders, all the body panels, and a bunch of the structure, stripping it down in preparation for this 1970 Dodge Charger body swap. So to start, we're going to show you the 1970 Dodge Charger. This was originally a 318 car that was non-numbers matching when I bought it. The only thing I really did to it was strip it down and paint it myself. This is a House of Color Candy Brandy wine if you're interested. So take a look and let me know what you think in the comment section below, whether I should have cut it up or not. So here we are stripping it down, taking the fenders and the front end off, including the grille and most of the structure, the bash bar. The headlights are actually attached to the fenders. As I move closer here, you'll be able to see the paint jobs on the surface level, so really it's not as pretty as it looked. These tabs that I'm pointing to right here are essential that I keep because I want to be able to make sure that when I put the body on the new chassis, the body lines will mount up well, as those holes are a factory mounting point for a factory welded bolt on the inside of the fender. So at this point you can see it's coming along really well, but it's just been simple removing body panels as if you were to repair a car. Here I'm going to be pointing to the rust on the floor to point it out to you guys to show you it's not as nice of a car as it really would have been. This is pretty controversial. A lot of people didn't want me to cut this up, but really my concerns here, as I do, are going to be maintaining the structural integrity of the car and this hood cowl. I thought about putting a brace bar from the left to the right pillar like I'm showing here, but I believe that if I maintain the hood cowl, it should give enough structural rigidity so the car doesn't move around and sway from the left to the right. Because I'm actually going to be removing the entire front half of the car first. I'm going to cut the floor right where the seam is, including the firewall and the frame rails. So once I do that, it'll be past the point of no return. So as you can see, I got a lot of work ahead of me. So why don't I put this down and we'll get into it and you can watch me cut this thing apart. It was at this point right here that I knew there was no going back. For me, this is a huge undertaking. I've owned this car for a few years and it was my dream car when I bought it. Now I'm cutting the frame rails on it. The word overwhelming doesn't even begin to describe the way that I feel as I look at the front half, which is separated from the rear half of my dream car, separated by two cut frame rails, non-serviceable, non-repairable. So I cut out the entire firewall, knowing that I'm going to use the one from the 2014 as I'm using the entire platform, and I made my master relief cut on the floorboard. I did do it up on the wheel arches as well, and here I'm going to show you how I did it. My theory behind this was to cut away a decent amount now, but know that I'm going to need to do a lot of trimming later, rather than do it all at one time and end up with a mess or cutting something that I didn't really mean to cut that I needed later. Every piece of this car that I cut away, I feel like I'm cutting away a piece of my heart. I was not in a financial position to buy this car when I did at 21 years old, and the world has not gotten any easier, so here we go. So as I began to cut more and more of this car away, particularly around the door sills and the rockers so I could fit it on top of the newer Charger, it began to dawn on me that I was going to need a way to hoist this thing up in the air. With my garage only being 7 foot tall, I didn't have many options, and I opted to go with a 4x4 post setup. And by doing this, I was able to shoulder the car up from the left and the right side, putting about 5 or 6 screws into it and then bringing them up and out every time I needed to move it. In the back, I used a 2x6x8 underneath of the jack and was able to hoist the back of the car up like that, so I could move it a little left to right and shimmy it, and I could move it up and down to the back. So now it's time to back the car underneath. This was a moment I've really been waiting for, and this was going to be the big pivotal point in this project for me, as I was finally going to mate these two cars, because up until this point it's been pretty overwhelming having two pretty decent cars that were entirely cut up and practically worthless. So as you can see, I was able to bend the fuel filler nozzle a little bit. It wasn't really a big deal to me because I knew I'm either going to replace or have to fabricate it anyway to get it to fit into the new Charger. So going back, I didn't really have any issues until right there I strike the bottom of the 1970. I unfortunately couldn't get it any higher with the jack. As you'll see here, I hardly get any movement out of it. So what I ended up doing was deflating the rear tires, which takes me a second here off camera. And I eventually got it rolled back and underneath. And here's in my mind the last big piece done. Take a second and take a look at what it looks like over top and how it lines up. This was a huge moment for me, absolutely pivotal in this build, and I couldn't be more excited. With much anticipation for the next day, I shut it down and get some sleep. The following day I wake up and I make these illustrations right here, which are going to show me and you guys how I'm going to mount these two cars together. I'm going to bring down the 1970 by shoulder and lower the door sill of that onto the door sill of the 2014. And after much frustration and shouldering it, I finally did bring it down all the way in the front and the rear. It sat a little high in the wheel arches, but I knew that was stuff I was going to be able to trim out. The big pictures here, the door sills are on the door sills, and the two cars have become one. So after the excitement kind of wore through and I was able to keep moving, I realized it was time to make some major adjustments. Now the front of the rear wheel is actually touching the front of the rear wheel arch. So I knew that this thing was going to have to slide forward quite a bit, and I also saw that I had quite a bit of room to play. I did do some trimming prior to filming this, and I was able to go ahead and use a ratchet strap to the front tire and the body mount. By doing this, I was going to be able to pull it and move it forward. You'll see here I have a starting line and a finish line. So I was able to move it about an inch on either side, and I went back and forth, and then eventually got 3 inches of total movement of clearance, which, as you'll see here in the rear wheel arch, that gave me about an inch, and I was able to triple that before the end. And that's going to be a wrap for this part of the video. Make sure you stay tuned for part 3. We test fit the doors, test fit the fenders, mess with the hood cowl, maybe even put in the windshield, but definitely give this thing the cleaning on the inside it deserves.